Well, shalom, hello, and welcome to another Parsha discussion. This week we are going to be talking about, I'm going to be talking about some of the aspects of the Parsha Miketz, which is translated as at the end. So a little bit of background as well is always, I think, prudent. So this Parsha sees us now coming to the end of Joseph's time in prison. And this Parsha, of course, starts with the dream of Pharaoh. So Pharaoh dreams a dream. He in fact dreams two dreams. And this is probably one of the more famous parts of the Yosef story, that and of course his coat of many colors. So if you talk about Yosef, most people will be able to recall that Joseph had a coat of many colors. They probably don't remember his father's name, certainly don't remember his brother's name, but then they remember that he interpreted that Pharaoh has a dream and he was able to interpret it. And there's a lot of wonderful things happening within the language of the dream, but that's not going to be my focus today, because what I really want to focus on again is the continuing narrative of Joseph and his brothers, because in this Parsha, Joseph is released from prison because the cupbearer, who was in prison with the chief baker of Pharaoh, they both had dreams, of course. And Joseph was able to interpret those dreams for them. One was very positive, being the cupbearer. The other one was very negative, being the chief baker. And Joseph says an interesting thing to the cupbearer just before he's about to be released. He says, remember me to Pharaoh, in the hope that his reputation as someone who is able to interpret dreams will be known to Pharaoh. And this is quite interesting, because the commentators talk about this in regards to that this is something that Joseph should not have done, because he was placing the well-being of his future in the hands of this person, this cupbearer, who was a person of the court of Pharaoh. And I'll just show you in a minute what that means. What type of person was the cupbearer? That's a very good question. And how does the cupbearer function in the way that he lives his life as someone who is very close to Pharaoh? And in saying that, there's a very good comment by Rashi on the verse in Genesis 41:12-13, which relates to us something quite interesting about the type of person that the cupbearer was. So in the English, our text reads, so the cupbearer is now talking to Pharaoh. And if we go back to verse 9, of course, Pharaoh's had his dream. Nobody can interpret it. Nobody at all. It says in verse 9 of chapter 41, then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, I remember my offences today. So what is he talking about here? He says, I recall that time when I really upset you and you sent me to prison. And when Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me and the chief baker in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, we dreamed on the same night, he and I, each having a dream with its own interpretation. And this is where we get to the verse I want to just quickly point out to you and what Rashi says about this. So in verse 12, a young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. When we told him, he interpreted our dreams to us, giving an interpretation to each man according to his dream. And as he interpreted to us, so it came about. I was restored to my office, and the baker was hanged. Yes, very grim. Now, here's the interesting thing that I want to show you what Rashi says about this, because this phrase here, a young Hebrew was there with us, a servant. There's actually three descriptive words he uses: a na'ar, an ivri, and an evid. And this phrase here really doesn't, in the English again, doesn't convey to us the hidden meaning behind the way that the Torah records that the cupbearer spoke to Pharaoh about Yosef, and how disparaging his words actually were, and what we can learn because of this. So Rashi points out that na'ar is the Hebrew word for lad, or a young person, a young man. Ivri is this word where we get the term Hebrew, and Ivri literally means someone from the other side. And evid is the word for slave or servant. So Rashi says, "Cursed be the wicked, for the favors they do are never really complete." I love this. He mentions him in disparaging language. Now, what does Rashi mean by this? So let's just add a bit of colour to the context here of what's going on. So this is court life. So you have Pharaoh, you have the people around him, and everybody wants access to Pharaoh so that Pharaoh can listen to what they have to say, listen to their requests. So anybody who is close to a monarch, someone in power, and has their ear, as they say, is a person of influence. They have a position of power. And the cupbearer is one of those people. So he sees court life as that. Who has the best position? Who has the best power? Who can benefit from their position? And he would be somebody that would really, really benefit from his position as the cupbearer of Pharaoh. He has direct access, personal access to Pharaoh. So he would be the type of person that you can imagine would be accepting a vast amount of bribes. You know, a certain person needs a certain thing built, or a certain contractor or builder wants to, get their hands on a lucrative contract and to build the latest and greatest, pyramid. And so they say to the cupbearer, "How about, could you possibly put in a good word for me with the Pharaoh? And, I just happen to have the sack of gold here. And why don't you have that as well, because I'm feeling generous?" So, and this is why Rashi's talking about this. "Cursed be the wicked, for the favors they do are never really complete." So the cupbearer he's thinking, what's in it for me? How can I get the best out of this? And also, if he knows that Joseph's going to be able to interpret this dream, what happens if Joseph gets into a position of power, then looks at him and says, "Hey, you could have helped me out. I helped you out. I interpreted your dream. You did nothing for me, and I'm going to make you pay." Because that is exactly what the cupbearer would do. It's exactly what he would do. And this is why Rashi's pointing this out. So he looks at each of these words. Na'ar, a lad. So he's young. He's unwise. He's unfitted for a high position. So he may say some stuff, but really he's not mature enough to handle any responsibility. He's an Ivri, a Hebrew, who does not even know our language, which I find quite interesting, because I would assume that in the prison they would have been speaking Egyptian, and so I'm not quite sure why Rashi has the language pointed out this way. I tend to disagree with this little insight, but declaring him as a Hebrew, an Ivri, he's not one of us, he's saying. He's not like us. He's not even close to like us. He's just an Ivri. He is a Evid. He's a slave. He's lower than the low, Just use him to interpret the dream and then send him on his way. Don't, There's nothing else to see here. So he's a slave. And it is written in the laws of Egypt that a slave may neither become a ruler nor dress in princely robes. And of course he gets this from Genesis 89 verse 7, or it's not really a verse, it's side 7 or chapter or part 7. So that's a really important way of looking at, this is the type of environment that Yosef is engaged in. This is where he is. Alright? And so again, it adds context, it adds colour. So we know what they're like, we know what the people of Pharaoh's court are like. Is Joseph going to be the same? Is he going to be like them? And the answer is no, he's not going to be nothing like them. Now, there's something else I just wanted to quickly point out as well to you that I thought was quite wonderful. A wonderful insight by the Baal HaTurim. And he makes a comment on verse 45, and this name, Zephanath Paneah. Now, in the English, that's phonetically, that's not how it should be pronounced, okay? Here we have the Hebrew spelling of this word. So it actually should be Zophnat Paneach. So there's a guttural chet at the end of this word. Now, the Baal HaTurim is just wonderful in the way he understands the text and the letters and their groupings and their phrasings and how the gematria and all sorts of wonderful things. So he points out that this name, Zafnat Paneach, is an acronym for a phrase. And he says it's Zadik Pit Pet Nefesh Tava. Okay? A righteous man, pet pet. So a pet pet prevails. Nefesh, this is soul, ta'ava, and this is this wonderful word for desire. Now, you would have heard me mention this word before. It's a very important word in the context of understanding how our desire functions, I should say, in relation to the desire of God. So he says, a righteous man, he prevailed against his soul's desire. So that's the first word, Zafnat. Okay, Zadik, Pei, Nun, Tet. And then he looks at the second word here, Paneach, and he says this stands for Potifar, Ina Nafsho, Chinam. Sorry, I was looking at that and suddenly my brain went blank. It's not a tav. What is that? It's a chet. Chinam. Okay? And he translates this as yet, so he's just added the yet. Potiphar oppressed his soul without reason. So nefesh here is this word for soul. It's often translated as soul. So nafshor means his soul. Chinam, without reason. Okay, so I just find that's just a wonderful insight. But look at this, what he points out here, the gematria of this name. So Zafnat Paneach is 822, and it is equal to that of the phrase Magale Musutarim. And what does that mean? Revealer of things hidden. Coincidence? Maybe. Maybe not. So in the last parsha, the parsha before this, we saw the beginning of the narrative of Yoseph, and we went through quite a bit in that. But the main thing that I talked about was this idea, this issue of there being no peace between these brothers, and how they treated each other and how they talked to each other, and that Yoseph was what he was. He was immature, as an immature 17-year-old who was a gossip. He would run to his father and say bad things about them, and that Yaakov wanted to stop the cycle of speech that was going to rend the brothers apart, rend his family apart, and sends Yosef to go and see his brothers and to eat shalom, and to see peace in them. Remember the English says that go and see that it is well with your brothers and that it is well with the flocks. But we know when looking at that now, it's shalom. Go and see shalom. See shalom in your brothers. See shalom in the way they are doing things, in the way that they are shepherds and performing their lifestyle. So Yaakov was trying to facilitate a process. And here's the amazing thing about that process was started and will see a conclusion. And this is the thing that I really want to sort of show you how this continues through the vein of the narrative of the interaction between Yosef and his brothers when they meet again in the land of Egypt, in Mitzrayim, and His brothers do not recognize him, but he recognizes them. So, starting at verse 6, it now states, Joseph was governor over the land. So he was the man. He was in charge. He was the one who sold to all the people of the land. So he was in charge of the distribution of the stored up grain and food because of the 7 years of plenty. And every place was in famine. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed themselves before him with their faces to the ground. Now Joseph saw his brothers and recognized them, but he treated them like strangers and spoke roughly to them. Where do you come from? He said. They said, from the land of Canaan to buy food. Now, let's start with Rashi and let's look at what Rambam has to say about this verse, particularly verse 7, because what we see here is these two words here, and Rashi looks at these, so vayakirim, vayit nakir, which is translated as Yosef recognized them, and he recognized them, but he treated them like strangers. Okay, and Rashi says this as he made himself strange unto them. This is how he translates these words. So he made himself like a nakri, a stranger to them in his conversation, speaking harshly to them. So what Rashi says is that it's the way he talks to them that he made himself unfamiliar to them. So he didn't speak to them in a way that would cause them to possibly recognize him. But Rambam has a very different perspective or viewpoint on this particular word here. So this word here is, he recognized them, and he recognized them, and here translated as treated them like a stranger, or was strange towards them. So Rambam says about this word, says immediately as he saw them, he recognized them, and feared lest they recognize him, and he made himself strange, vayit nakir, so unto them, by putting a mitre upon his forehead and part of the face, thus disguising himself. So what Rambam believes is that it's not that he spoke to them in a strange way to hide his identity. He actually disguised himself. Now, the reason I point this out is because of what's going on in verse 8 as well. So verse 7, we have that he recognized them, but his brothers didn't recognize him. And then it goes to say, and Joseph recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. Okay, so he recognizes them, but acts towards them like a stranger. So makes himself as a stranger to them. And then the Torah emphasizes this by saying Joseph recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. So they did not recognize him either because he was much older now, so 20-something years have passed by, but his facial features were different. So he disguised himself particularly. And Joseph remembered the dreams that he had dreamed of them, and he said to them, you are spies. You have come to see the nakedness of the land. Okay, so here's the most important thing that I would just want to quickly point out. There is a verb sitting in here that is repeated 4 times in these 2 verses. And whenever that happens, we need to stop. And if we are able to, and that's why I'm pointing this out to you, because if you don't read it in the Hebrew, then we can't see the underlining thread of gold that sits in there, that begins to talk to us about what Yosef was actually trying to facilitate here. Because the commentators as well, they asked the question, why did Yosef have to act so harshly towards them? Why did he treat them this way? Why do all these things? Why not immediately, say to them, I am your brother, how is our father? Is he still alive? Go and tell him quickly. Go and get him. Bring him here. No, we had to wait for 2 interactions in a passage of time. And the commentators even go so far as to say this seems a bit cruel. It's cruel for Yosef to continue to subject his father to this mourning and his loss Why not let him know that he's alive and bring joy back to his heart? But anyway, so the idea here is, and this is something else that I want to point out, is that we need to see this. This is the first time that Joseph sees his brothers again since his last interaction with them. And what was that last interaction? They mistreated him terribly. They saw him coming and they conspired to kill him. And then Reuben says, no, we can't kill him. What would that benefit us? And then they chuck him in the pit. And then they sell him, and he ends up as a slave. So this is pretty, this is traumatizing. If we can't see that how traumatized Joseph is because of this, separated from his father's house, separated from his family, from everything he knows, terribly mistreated by his brothers, and sent into forced exile away from his family, away from the land of covenantal inheritance, to a place of idolatry where the people continue to treat him badly. As we see with Potiphar's wife and what happened, he ends up in prison, the cupbearer and all that, they don't treat him wise, but finally he's in a position of power where he can determine his own destiny, and everybody has to do as he says and treat him with the respect of his office, or otherwise he can have them executed straight away. So, and also we must remember that his last words with his father was, find peace with your brothers, find peace in them. And so he now sees them, and one of the things I've realized is that he's still trying to do what his father asked him to do here. He really is. And what happens because of these verbs, I believe, gives us a deeper insight into the type of administrator that Joseph was. He was a man who was given a great capacity to administrate kingdom life for the benefit of the community, for the benefit of family. And he wanted to do that with his brothers. But he had to see the peace in them. He had to see it for real in them and know it to be true. And look at this. So this verb that we see here 4 times. So let's quickly go back to this other one. So and this is the interesting thing about this verb. It's a weak, what we call a weak verb. So in some conjugations, verb conjugations, the noon disappears. It becomes hidden. So here we see it in its full, as its 3 trilateral root should be. But here the noon is missing. We just have the kaf and the resh. Now if you go to the next verse, into verse 8, you're going to see the same thing. The noon is missing. It's hidden. But what does this verb mean? So it means to investigate, to recognize, to misjudge, to make oneself unrecognized, and to act as a stranger. So let me just go back to my notes so don't go off track here. When we look at the narrative of Joseph meeting his brothers, there are a few things that we need to consider so that we understand the context of the exchanges that we see in this parsha. Firstly, Joseph remembered the hate that his brothers, especially the sons of Leah, had for him. There were never words of peace between them. So 37 verse 4, but when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to them. So again, this is still out playing in these verses. There is no peaceful words between them. But Joseph is doing something very, very particular here in the way he talks to them. So these memories of a 17-year-old boy come to surface, yet Joseph is no longer that boy who pleaded for his brothers to show mercy and compassion. Now he is the second most powerful person in the ancient world. As we will see, this narrative is ultimately about reconciliation through truth, repentance, and forgiveness. This parsha sets the scene for this process, and when we read it as such, in other words, when we allow the context of that to allow us to see the narrative in that way, we see the heart of God moving throughout the words of Torah to help us see the pathway through conflict towards peace. This is the pathway of kindness and truth. So we have this reoccurring verb in these verses. Now I just want to do something, I guess, something fun about this, and just help us to understand or to see a deeper picture of what's going on with Yosef acting this way. So his actions are governed by the desire to administrate life and to increase the value of kindness and peace within his family and with his brothers. But he needs to know that his brothers will be able to reciprocate that. So if there's only one person in the family that's committed to peace and everybody else isn't, then it's not going to work. The atmosphere of kindness and peace has to prevail. So how does he facilitate this? Look at this. The letter Nun. So we have a Nun, we have a Kaf, and we have a Resh. Now the letter Nun is often talked about in this idea of being able to, increase or multiply something, multiplying seeds per se. But really, there's a deeper and more vital characteristic that the letter Nun brings to us when we engage with it. And this is the idea of how we serve and how we learn to serve. When we serve through humility, with the goal of increasing life according to the ways of God, then it brings us to a place where we can stand as a servant, engaging face to face with God as an administrator of his ways. And this is something that they talk about with Moses. As a servant, God talks about there is no other servant in my house who was as faithful. So the letter Nun talks about this idea of faithfulness in the way we serve. When we serve a higher cause, when we serve the ways of God, we are serving something that is above our way, but we are walking in that way, so that way begins to govern through us. So this is all about how we govern. So so that we can investigate, so that we can recognize. So this is something there's a duality going here on with this verb, because it can be to misjudge. So it depends on the heart of the person. So we can look at the heart of Yosef here, and we can see he recognizes his brothers. Now, he's the most powerful man in the land of Egypt, second only to Pharaoh. He could have immediately have them executed. Not a problem at all. And in fact, he even goes so far as to set it up so he could do that. You are spies. You come to see the nakedness of the land. What an accusation, straight away. And so this letter Nun talks about the heart of the servant and their faithfulness towards something that is greater than themselves. So they're not in it for themselves. So you compare the way Yosef administrated his position as compared to the cupbearer. Now this letter Kaf is all about the crown. It's all about government. It's about the way we function in the outworking of the desire of our hearts. Are our souls tied to the natural realm, or are they tied to the eternal ways of God? So there's a crisis point here as well in this word. Do we make ourselves unrecognizable to the ways of God? Do we act as a stranger towards that? Or are we someone that brings about the recognition and a deeper investigation of the ways of God so that they increase? So the katir, the crown. Oof, wonderful stuff. And it's interesting because when we go back to what the Baal HaTorah is talking about, because he says here, a righteous man, he prevailed against his soul's desire. And you can almost picture it really when Yosef sees his brothers for the first time. The feelings. Remember the feelings. This is he was a young 17-year-old, and who all he's known from his brothers is the way they treated him, which was without mercy, without compassion, without brotherly love. And this Resh here, so now this is a wonderful letter as well. So the Resh always talks again. So this word provides a covenantal framework for how we process our servanthood in the ways of God. What do we recognize? Are we able to recognize the ways of God, or are we a stranger to them? So does the way we act cause people to recognize God within us, or do they just recognize someone, or do they just see someone who acts in a hostile way towards them? Again, there's a lot going on here. It's quite amazing. And so the Resh is wonderful as well, because it's not just about this idea of government. It's also about this. There's a very wonderful esoteric idea that talks about having a cosmic perspective, and that the idea here is that being able to perceive situations from an elevated position. So anyway, thought I'd just leave you with that. And I think that's one of the reasons why this verb is in here, and it's in here 4 times. So we can say that the 4 is the dalet. It's the doorway into humility. So even though Yosef is in his place of absolute power, his humility to the ways of God and his desire to serve those things, in other words, his desire to serve his family, prevails against everything that could be in his soul that would seek to cause destruction of the family. So there's another wonderful way of looking at it. Well, let's continue on. So the narrative continues on, and so when we delve into the language of Yosef as he accuses his brothers of being spies, what is the underlying accusation? That's a great question. That they are people of violence, uncaring of the lives they destroy in pursuit of their goals, that they are men who are incapable of peace. Now I go back to what I initially said, and that Yosef still remembers the words of his father when he sent him to see his brothers, and that go and see peace. See peace. Yosef is, I believe he's desperate here to see the wealth of peace that he knows is in his brothers. He has changed. He needs to know that they've changed. He believes they've changed, so he's going to challenge them on a very personal level to see how they respond. So how do they respond at first? Starting in verse 10, they said to him, "No, my lord, your servants have come to buy food. We are all sons of one man. So we are honest men. Your servants have never been spies." Now, just before I continue on, just while I remember, this here as well is very important, because this actually sets the scene for why he does this here. Why does he accuse them of being spies? And why does the Torah emphasize that Yosef remembered the dreams that he had dreamed of them? Now, we need to sort of look at the commentary here again, and particularly Ramban. So Ramban has a very large commentary on this, and I just want to sort of paraphrase it, because its implications regarding the fulfillment of Yosef's dreams, and this is something that he points out, and which is actually contrary to something that Rashi says on this. So Rashi believes that Yosef, when he remembered the dreams that he had dreamed, Rashi believes that Yosef thought or felt that the first dream of his brothers bowing down to him had been fulfilled. Because look, it says, "And Yosef's brothers came and bowed themselves before him." So Rashi says that's the fulfillment of the first dream. Rambam disagrees, because Rambam says Yosef did not see Benjamin, his other brother, there. And because of that, he realizes that the dream has not come to pass. And the dreams are very important to this family. So they would have known about the dream of their father Yaakov. And that when you have dreams like these things, that God is facilitating a process towards the increase and expansion of being able to live and to be able to increase. So it's not for destruction. So Joseph seeing his brothers bow down to him was never for him to have power over them, but it's more to be able to be in a position to facilitate greater life for his family. And Rambam believes this. So he says that Scripture states that when Joseph saw his brothers bowing down to him, he remembered all the dreams which he had dreamed concerning them, and he knew that in this instance not one of the dreams had been fulfilled. And this is where the commentators also bring out this idea that they discuss this idea of, was Joseph being unnecessarily cruel to his father by not revealing himself. So Rambam goes, it is for this reason that he did not wish to tell them at this time, I am Joseph your brother, and to say, hasten and go up to my father and send wagons, as he did after the second time they came back, when he revealed himself. See, were it not for this consideration, Joseph would indeed be regarded as having committed a great sin, bringing anguish to his father, leaving him for many days in the position of being bereft, and mourning for Simeon and himself. And because we know, we're going to see that, what does Joseph do? He keeps Simeon, sends the brothers back, and he puts a condition upon them so that he can measure the truthfulness of their ways. Now here's something really interesting as well, because so Rambam's pointing out, Joseph knows at this point that the first dream has not been fulfilled. And the only way for that dream to be fulfilled, and therefore release the power of that dream as a provision for his family life, so that puts them in a place of governing themselves, so they're not subject to the natural, but they're now in the provision of God for the whole family. He needs Benjamin in Egypt. He needs them to come and to be able to recognize Joseph as a person in a position that requires respect. And that's what you do when you're bowing down. It's showing respect for the position of power, the position of authority. So Joseph has to facilitate that. And that's why he did what he did when they did eventually come back, in regards to the issue with him putting his personal goblet in Benjamin's sack. So anyway, let's continue on. So here we go. So we are all sons of one man. We are honest men. Your servants have never been spies. Now, this is something interesting, because I never really saw this before until I really started looking at this again. And that is that, so we now know, so we've established that Joseph knows that the first dream hasn't come true. It hasn't come to pass by just his 10 brothers bound to him. There needs to be 11. He needs to get Benjamin there. But he can't do it in a way that reveals that he knows that would cause them to recognize him. So how does he do this? He does this in a very, very clever way. He continues to accuse them of being spies. So he says in verse 12, no, it is the nakedness of the land that you have come to see. What does he mean? What does this mean? The nakedness of the land. So it means that the whole nation is in famine. They're in a weakened state. So there's not enough food. So the armies aren't as provisioned as they normally would be. So they would be, if there was to be an attack by another group of people that, were strong at that time, then there's no guarantee of the outcome. So that's what he's saying. You've come here to see how weak we are, because you want to attack us. You want to take all our stuff. So are you that type of people? Are you like the other people of the land of Canaan and Egypt and that? Do you see your power as a way to take from the weak to increase yourself? Is that the type of person you are? Because that wasn't the type of person that Abraham was. That wasn't the type of person that Yitzchak was. That's not the type of person that Yaakov was. And Joseph's saying, that's not the type of person I am either. What about you? So he's trying to find the truth of their hearts here. But he needs to facilitate the outworking of this dream. It's just wonder. It's just the genius of it and the wonder. And look what happens. So he's again accusing them. So, no, I don't believe you. I don't believe what you say, because they've already said, we are all the sons of one man. That's it. We have never been spies. And then they do something remarkable. We your servants are 12 brothers, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. And behold, the youngest is this day with our father, and one is no more. And Joseph at this point is like, I got you. Now I've got you. Now I can do what needs to be done to facilitate getting Benjamin here to Egypt, here to Mitzrayim. So Joseph said to him, it is as I said to you, you are spies. Okay, so the accusation's still there. And there's quite a remarkable, Rambam talks about this. Why this accusation? So where does this accusation come from? Because there's got to be some sort of ground for this accusation. You can't just say, you're spies, that's it, blah, blah, blah. But anyway, listen to this. Listen to what Rambam has to say on verse 9. What's going on here? Wherein he says, when he first accuses them, you are spies, you have come to see the nakedness of the land. Rambam says, this accusation requires some reason or some plausible explanation for what did they do that he should so accuse them. So people from every country came to him to buy grain, and they were among those who came. So everybody's coming to Egypt to buy grain. Okay, so this is obvious. This is without question. And the sons of Yaakov, these 10 brothers, they're doing exactly the same thing. They come to purchase grain. But all of a sudden they find themselves in front of this, this crazed ruler, this the viceroy of Egypt, as they would think. So perhaps the reason for the accusation was that they had the appearance of men of stature and prominence, all of them clothed most gorgeously, whereupon he said to them, it is not customary for prominent people as you to come to buy food, having as you do many servants. So he's saying to them, look, you guys look like you got some money, you look like you're people of wealth and influence. Why wouldn't you send servants, Why you? Why are you here in particular? Rambam also goes on to say, it is possible that they were the first ones to come from the land of Canaan. This is the meaning of the verse, and the sons of Israel came to buy grain among those that came, for the famine was in the land of Canaan here, meaning that now they were the first who came from there. So Joseph said to them, you are spies, since no one has come from the land of Canaan to buy food. So this is the intent of the question, where have you come from? Which he addressed to them at the outset. Okay, so now here's something else as well I want to point out, because this also deals with this issue. Rambam also mentions in his commentary on verse 11 an important midrash that explains why the brothers had to include the issue of a missing brother in their introduction and defense. So they're trying to defend themselves from the accusation here. And this one is quite interesting, because what it does is that it points out, the midrash says that the brothers entered separately through 10 different access points into the city where they had come into, where Joseph saw them, and that it was known to him that they'd done so, and that because this is suspicious behavior, very suspicious behavior, because he says to them, you entered by 10 gates, and now you are all gathering in one place and conspiring together. So this is from the midrash, so this is not in the Torah itself. This is nothing other than the behavior of spies. Thereupon they said to him, it is because we are brothers that we are gathered together. But he said, not so, but you have come to find out the condition of the land. If you were brothers, you should have entered by one gate, just as you are now together. Then they told him that one of them is gone, and that they had gone in search of him. Now that's very interesting. Now it's what's going on here is that the commentators are wrestling and grappling with this idea, and so there is this oral tradition that talks about that the brothers came separately, and that knowing they were in Egypt, they went to see if they could actually find Joseph, because they knew he was still alive. They knew he hadn't been killed at that time anyway, when they sold him. And so here we go. This is why they do this. So this is what Joseph is trying to facilitate. And then we get into verse 15. By this you shall be tested. So what is he testing? He's testing the truth of their hearts. He's testing to see if they are actually men of peace. You have to bring Benjamin. And there was an underlying issue going on here as well, that the commentators sort of feel that Joseph wanted to know if they had been mistreating Benjamin as well. So send one of you, See, and here again, because this doesn't actually happen. Send one of you and let him bring your brother while you remain confined, that your words may be tested, whether there is truth in you. Okay, whether your words may be tested. So what is happening here? He is still looking to find the truth in what his father said. See peace in your brothers. Know peace in your brothers. And the only way to do this is to see if the way they treat each other, how had they been treating Benjamin? How would they treat him if they knew that he was their brother? If he revealed it, what would they do? How would they speak to him? Would they just disparage him and say, "Oh, just Joseph, we still hate you"? Had they changed? So everything he'd been through to get him to this point, where he's able to say to them later on, "Fear not, everything that God did was for good." Tov ma'od, very good. Remember, everything God does is because he sees the good, and he wants to facilitate the drawing out and the revealing of the good. So Joseph is having to do what? He's having to investigate the matter of his brothers. It's staggering when you stop and you think about how intricately, beautifully complex all of this is and what's happening. So he puts them all in custody for 3 days. Wonderful. And then eventually he releases them. And so what does it say? So the Torah presents a very interesting scenario when Joseph chooses to hold Simeon as a hostage until they return with Benjamin. So why did he choose Simeon? Why did he choose Simon? Also look at the words of Reuben to his brothers. So we continue on from verse 18 here. I don't actually have it, on the notes here on the thing, but it says, "On the third day Joseph said to them, 'Do this and you will live, for I fear God.'" I mean, these guys must be very confused by now. They're like, "What do you mean you fear God? What is going on here?" Again, he's testing them to see how they respond. So if you are honest men, let one of your brothers remain confined where you are in custody, and let the rest go and carry grain for the famine of your households. And bring your youngest brother to me, so your words will be verified, and you shall not die. And they did so. Then they said to one another, and this is the beautiful thing about this, because here the truth of how they had changed starts to come out, and this is what Joseph sees. But he can't reveal himself because the first dream has to be fulfilled. Then they said to one another, and this is in verse 21, "In truth we are guilty concerning our brother." So what did I talk about? Reconciliation and forgiveness through truth. What's the word that turns up here? Truth. Oh my gosh. So you can be tested. That your words may be tested whether there is truth in you. So in other words, it's just amazing. It's amazing what the Torah does. "In truth we are guilty concerning our brother, in that we saw the distress of his soul when he begged us, and we did not listen. That is why this distress has come upon us." And Reuben answered them, "Did I not tell you not to sin against the boy? But you did not listen, so now there comes a reckoning for his blood." They did not know that Joseph understood them, for there was an interpreter between them. Then he turned away from them and wept. See, this again, this is the heart of Joseph is being revealed to us. And he returned to them and spoke to them. And he took Simeon from them and bound him before their eyes. And Joseph gave orders to fill their bags with grain and to replace every man's money in his sack, and to give them provisions for the journey. This was done for him. So why do this for Simeon? Just very quickly, and it's because Joseph had to do something important here. He had to separate two of the brothers particularly, Simeon and Levi. And the reason that he had to do this because he knows their capacity for violence. These two, when they get worked up, oh my gosh, watch out. And we see this from what happened at Shechem, in regard to their sister Dinah when she was violated, and they waited for 3 days after all the men of the city of Shechem had been circumcised, and they just go and kill the whole lot of them. Great violence, and of course Yaakov is just like, what the? Anyway, you go back and look at it. But what I want to do is want to quickly finish with talking about something that's a very important exchange as well, because what happens in this parsha sets us up, or the end of this parsha sets us up for what happens between Judah and Joseph. So remember, what's happening here? See, this is about reconciliation through truth, repentance, and forgiveness. These brothers have to come to a place where they can actually, family life can truly continue on. Because if Joseph reveals himself to them, what's going to be the thing between them? What they did to him. And they're going to be in fear of that because of his position of power. And this is going to cause a fracture within the family life. They're not going to be able to, they're not going to feel comfortable around them. And all he wants to do is be a brother to them, and them to be a brother to him. And so he's got to deal with this issue. He's got to deal with this. And so, but someone's got to take leadership here. Yosef has to see this leadership, and it's wonderful, absolutely wonderful how this happens. Oh my gosh. So there's a very important exchange between Yaakov and Reuven, and then Yaakov and Yehuda when the food runs out again. In chapter 42, verse 29, which goes all the way through to chapter 43, verse 15. So when they return to Yaakov after their first visit to Egypt, they recount all the events and interaction with the unknown Yosef and what was required to return and free Simeon. Yaakov now rejects the idea of Benjamin going down to Egypt. It is important to note how Reuven attempts to take leadership of the situation, and that Yaakov rejects his position. So chapter 42 verses 37 to 38 says this: Then Reuben said to his father, "Kill my two sons if I do not bring him back to you." So he's talking about Benjamin. You can trust me. You can trust me. And if it doesn't work out, then here's two of my sons. You can kill them. What the heck? This is not the way it should. This is not the way Yaakov does things. And rightly so, he says, "No way. Put him in my hands and I will bring him back to you." But he said, Yaakov says, "My son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he is the only one left. If harm should happen to him on the journey that you are to make, you would bring down my grey hairs with sorrow to Sheol," to the grave, as they say in the English translation. And so Yaakov just flatly rejects this. No way am I giving you the remaining son of Rachel, my youngest son, so that you can try and get back Simeon and return hopefully alive after everything that's happened, and then if it doesn't work out, expect me to kill you, my two of my grandchildren. It's like, what the heck? No. Now look at the difference of what Yehuda does here. This is just beautiful. And so this is in chapter 43 verses 8 to 10. And Judah said to Israel his father, "Send the boy with me." So this is after all the food's running out. So a period of time has now transpired. So Reuven does this when they get back. Judah realizes that this is not the way things are going to work, and he knows how to take leadership over this area. He says, "Send the boy with me, and we will arise and go, that we may live and not die, both we and you, and also our little ones." So he's saying, we all need to live here. We need to survive. And you grandchildren, come on. I will be a pledge of his safety. From my hand you shall require him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him before you, then let me bear the blame forever. Someone taking personal responsibility. And this is Yehuda. If we had not delayed, we would now have returned twice. I guess just really stop and think about what's going on here with Yehuda, with Judah, and the responsibility he's now taking, and realizing the journey that he's been on of coming to realize the wrong he's done, but also that he's got a responsibility so that the family life does, from now on, flourish. So he could never do anything again that would stop that or harm that like he did with Yosef. And this is why the story of Judah and Tamar in the previous Parsha is so important as well. And I encourage you to go and look at that, because that's when Judah acknowledges publicly that he's been wrong, as he does with Tamar. When she says, the man who fathered this child, these are his, so this is his stuff. And Judah stops and he goes, you know what, you're right, I've acted wrong. I've acted wrong here, and I've almost caused another tragedy. And that is the moment where he understands the power of teshuvah, of returning his heart back to the ways of God. And we see this here. And we're going to see something incredibly powerful in the next Parsha, at the beginning of that, in the exchange between Judah and Yosef. So Yaakov acquiesces, and understanding diplomacy. So Yaakov, man, he's just brilliant. He's a brilliant guy. Brilliant, patriarch. Requires they take gifts with them to show that they honor the position of power that the viceroy of Egypt has. In other words, come with respect. Come with honor. Which changes completely the way they do things. He brings stability back to their actions by causing them to be aware of the way of honor, which is what Yaakov did with his brother, his older brother, when he honored him as his elder brother. Beautiful, beautiful. So all this leads to the incident with the cup of Yosef and the sack of Benjamin, and the ultimate showdown that follows between Yehuda and the second most powerful man in the ancient world. Oh man, the suspense, what a cliffhanger. So that's how this Parsha ends. This Parsha ends with the incident of the cup. Yosef instructs his servant to put the cup within the in the sack. He goes and accuses him, why have you done this? You've repaid evil for good. And they realize, oh my gosh, and then they go back to face up to whatever's about to happen. And then this wonderful, wonderful leadership of Yehuda, doing what needs to be done it's just wonderful, wonderful. So anyway, we'll talk about that in the next Parsha. So shalom, shalom, Baruch Hashem. Oh, just wonderful, wonderful, wonderful stuff. Shalom.